Okay, so welcome to part 3 of the series that I'm doing where I'm reading this guy David Rubin's book. Let's get right into it. We're not going to waste any time because if you watch the previous 2 sections, you're probably thinking like, wow, this book has some really crazy stuff in it. Well, it somehow gets crazier in this section, and I don't know if they're going to change this or they're going to fix this or whether this was intentional or not, but there's a huge error in this book. There's a huge error in this book that I don't know how this got past whoever wrote it or whoever fact-checked it or did a proof of it or whatever, but I'll show you. We'll start with that, okay? So this next section, we did the first 4 chapters, and now we're on chapter 5. This one's called Check Your Facts, Not Your Privilege.
Check your facts, not your
The kind of narrative of this book, the story of this book, is that Dave Rubin was like this leftist, borderline communist guy. I made that part up, but the story is he's a leftist, and then he is exposed to all these truthful things, and he's like, ooh, I gotta go over the other side because there's just way more truth over there. And one of the defining events that pushed him over to this other side was an interview he did on the Dave Rubin program, where he had this guy, Larry Elder, on.
The idea that a racist white cop and shooting unarmed black people is a peril to black people is BS. It's complete and total BS.
And here's a little quote. This is him talking about the interview. Although I was prepared on one level, as the host asking all the questions, nothing could have prepared me for the red pill that Larry was going to put in my mouth and force me to swallow. Okay, so this is a big deal. This is a defining moment. This is part of the origin story of this comic book superhero known as David Rubin, okay? It's a big defining event. So this guy, Larry Elder, comes on the show. Do I really need to describe who Larry Elder is? We'll talk about this later, but he's just a right-wing guy. So he has this quote. This is in the book. I'll read this, and then I'm going to show this on the screen, where this guy, Larry Elder, starts to red pill David Rubin, okay? And they're talking about basically police action toward black people. And here's the quote. This is where a lot of questions come up for me on Dave Rubin, okay? Half the homicides in this country are committed by and against black people. Okay, you got that? Half the homicides in this country are committed by and against black people. Last year, there were 14,000 homicides. 96% of them were black on black. Last year, I'll read it again. Last year, there were 14,000 homicides. 96% of them were black on black. This is not this is not what this guy actually said. Let's watch the actual interview.
Black people, half the homicides in this country are committed by and against black people. Last year, there were 14,000 homicides. Not talking about suicides, I'm talking about homicides. Mm-hmm. Half of them were black. 96% of them black on black of that 7,000.
Last year, there were 14,000 homicides. Not talking about suicides. Half of them were black. Okay? That's the part that was left out.
Half of them were black.
So what the quote in the book is saying is that there were 14,000 homicides, and basically 13,000 or whatever 96% of them were black on black, which is totally not true. Half of them were black on black. So, this I'm willing to give whoever wrote this, whatever AI or if Dave Rubin himself wrote this book, I'm willing to say okay, this was just a mistake. They left out conveniently the extremely important part of half of them were black. Half of those 14,000 homicides were black.
Half of them were black.
And 96% of that half were black on black, which is in every murder statistic. You know, you can look at the FBI statistics. People who murder each other are usually the same race. So it's not unique to black people. That's an aside. What's accidentally or intentionally being wrote in the book is that of basically all the homicides in 2015 were black people. Okay, a little bit of an aside here, but I found this really interesting looking at these 2015 homicide statistics. The amount of men committing, this is like the really fascinating statistic, the amount of men committing homicides is like 10 times, over 10 times, I think actually, regardless of race, 10 times the amount of homicides as women. So that throws another wrench in these guys' arguments, because if you're gonna go by like homicide statistics, you would have to say, actually, the real problem is dudes. The real problem is dudes. It has really nothing to do with the race. Women are kind of taking it easy on killing each other. But that's kind of very inconvenient for their arguments, I feel like. So just a little bit of an aside there. Okay, so the next section, he starts going again into these like rapid fire issues where he just debunks issues. And I'll give you an example of one. There's a bunch of them. There's gun control, climate change, a bunch of stuff. And one of them is wage gap. And I'll read you some of this. There are two things that could survive a nuclear war: cockroaches and the myth of the gender pay gap. Despite being debunked by countless economists, many of whom are women, by the way, it's a statistical lie that never dies.
A statistical lie?
So let's check the facts. I guess he's saying that it's a statistic that's being used to lie. So let's check the facts. First, the claim women earn 79 cents for every man's dollar is pure spin. The figure is an aggregate one, which compares the median of all women's earnings with the equivalent for all men. But this ignores job type, experience, and hours worked. Okay, so again, you haven't debunked a wage gap. You're just saying that there's a cause of the wage gap. We'll go into that more in a second. But again, this is not despite being debunked by countless economists, no economist has debunked the wage gap. No economist is like, there's no wage gap. It's just like, why is there a wage gap? When these factors are, which I'll read you a study in a second. When these factors are considered, the so-called gap disappears faster than conservative content on Twitter. The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that men... Okay, this one's kind of funny, actually. The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that men work longer hours. In 2017, men worked an average of 8.4 hours compared... Oh, this is a drastic different number. Compared to 7.8 hours for women. This is why men are making so much more money. They work an extra 40 minutes. Let's take a look at this study, actually. So he's setting up this thing of like, the wage gap, it's just because women make different choices. They make different choices. It's their fault. It's their fault. This is a study, you can look this up. It's called Children and Gender Inequality, Evidence from Denmark, 1980 to 2013. So it's a long-ass study. And they found out that basically when a woman has a child, on average, it's a 20% drop in long run, like the rest of her life pretty much, income. So she's going to make 20% less than if she didn't have a baby. So this is actually kind of course, this is a gender pay gap. Again, you haven't debunked anything. But this is like a bigger problem than even the kind of thing that he's setting up of just like, because what he's setting up is basically like he thinks that there are people who think that there's just companies are mean and they're like, hey, you're a woman. Hey, woman. A woman comes up, they're like, hey, you woman, you only get 70% because you're a girl. You're a girl and you got that long hair and that dress and that skirt. That hoop skirt from the 50s. So you get paid 70% less. And then a guy comes and they're like, 100% for you, dude. and they high five and they go to work. But I don't think anybody thinks that. It's just like, it's more, there's a gap. Women are making less overall. What's the deal? What's the deal there? And they found out that a big reason is because of women having children. And Dave Rubin even mentions this, but he spins it in an interesting way. Women also make different life choices. They're the only gender that can get pregnant. And he says, please don't cancel me. So they frequently choose to start families and raise children. Interesting. The only thing, though, is that really a choice? I mean, if you're born a woman, you're going to have some measure of imperative to have a kid. And if you have that kid, you're facing a 20% drop in income. I mean, this is more like, this puts Dave into even a more difficult spot than if he were defeating the straw man we were talking about, because now this is a critique of a system. Now we're saying the labor market rewards women for not having kids financially. Also, I guess is a little bit ironic because earlier they were talking about the importance of a family, having a family. Dave is like begrudgingly pro-choice, all this stuff. And now and of course it's like everything's free market. The free market is perfect, but here's a free market that disincentivizes having children. Something that's supposed to be, having children is supposed to be this beautiful experience. So it's supposed to be one of the greatest things that can happen to a person. And you're creating a new life, bringing new life into the world. Oh, by the way, it's completely disincentivized in the labor market. So, this is sort of like how all of these things go. All these little kind of talking points that he goes through. And the thing that I was thinking about this, what's kind of funny about this and a little bit ironic about this book, it's a fascinating book, actually. And I think the most interesting thing about it is that he's setting up this thing of, hey, we need to be free. We need to be free to think whatever we want, to say and express ourselves however we want. And the free market of ideas to create your own individual view of the world and to be able to talk about it. But it just so happens that mine are all the exact right-wing talking points. I mean, literally, when I was doing research for this, all these guys, all the people that he mentions in this and him, all their stuff matches exactly every right-wing think tank website out there on the internet. It's all exactly the same. So all this like free market of ideas stuff is somehow these open-minded guys are all funneling into the exact same ideas. Ones that seem to just be in lockstep, sheepish, in line with all this stuff. It's genius. It's genius, and it's my philosophy. This book has me sold. Thank you, David Rubin.